self-certify. And then above 42,000 gallons would require the third-party PE certification, all that good stuff. And so what we have is kind of a three-tiered approach to how we regulate on-farm fuel storage in a much more cost-effective manner. In fact, University of Arkansas did a study of our bill, and they said in Arkansas alone it would save farmers $240 million. So further, they did the study over the entire nation, and they estimate that it would save across the country $3.36 billion. That's considerable savings. Not only is that considerable savings for you, but those are dollars that you could be putting to work in the economy. So instead of folks in Washington further regulating, and you're already pretty heavily regulated, and we're going to work on that even further. But this was an opportunity to, to help lift that heavy boot of regulation off the throats of farmers that are just trying to make a crop and cash flow. So we're going to view this as a victory because we were able to move this out of committee. This came up in the Waterways Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure, so it wasn't under agricultural purview, even though it had application for farmers. Came up through Waterways. We passed it out of committee on a voice vote, not a single dissenting vote. We moved it out of the committee onto the floor under suspension of the rules. What that means is, in essence, both sides have already agreed to it, but it does require a 2/3 vote to pass. So we got to the floor with it. One side controls time in support, one side controls time in opposition. The opposition was my co-sponsor on the bill. So that's how good the bill was. Not a single dissenting vote on the floor. We passed it on a voice vote and have sent it to the Senate. And I got the opportunity to spend some time with both senators 2 or 3 weeks ago. We, along with Dr. Cochran, were in Panama visiting down there. And they are very well aware and going to hopefully shepherd that through and get that law passed so that will take a heck of a lot of regulatory costs off you that you don't need. So again, you take the victories where you can get them, and we're going to call that one a victory. Hopefully the Senate will move that. I wouldn't expect any opposition, just like in the House. It was a good bill, good bipartisan support, and hopefully we'll be able to deliver some relief in the form of the Fuels Act. And so that's some of the good news. Now, on to the Farm Bill. The Senate version of the Farm Bill, I won't go into great detail other than to say it was terrible. And you'll probably know that. It really adopted a Midwest template that kind of forces a crop insurance model across the country. If crop insurance works for you, that's fine. Go on ahead and use crop insurance. I'm not anti-crop insurance. But what I am anti is anti-one-size-fits-all approach. And one of the things that we discovered, of course we knew this all along, but we needed the folks on the Ag Committee to recognize this. We had a Farm Bill field hearing in Jonesboro back in March. This was one of 4 in the entire nation, and to my knowledge, this was the first and only Farm Bill field hearing that's ever been held in the state of Arkansas, a congressional hearing. So we're real proud of that. But what I'm especially proud of is the great job that the Arkansas producers did in articulating Mid-South positions and why it was important to recognize the diversity of agriculture and the production diversity regionally. And so we had these 4 Farm Bill field hearings, and the Mid-South was a sort of a super regional, so they had 10 panelists, and I was doing everything I could to get 10 of those 10 panelists from Arkansas. Couldn't do it, I got 5. So that's not too bad. As the host district, we got 5 Arkansas out of the 10, 5 producers, and they did a fantastic job. And we continue to hear from our chairman, Frank Lucas, as well as the committee staff, that by all accounts, our Farm Bill field hearing in Jonesboro was the best of the 4 in the country. So good, in fact, that the House bill is reflective of the needs of Mid-South farmers in a way that it hasn't been in the past. I will say this, we did lose the direct payment. I got several of the members to cop to the fact that it was purely political. We can go into that, and when I say political, I don't mean DNR, I mean it had a lot to do with geography, which most of our problems in this country are geographic rather than political in many cases. But this Farm Bill is reflective of the needs of Mid-South. It put in a provision called price loss coverage that sort of takes the place of direct payment It's modeled after the old support price or target price model, but updated and modified to reflect more of a real world structure. So basically it's, and I'll use rice as an example. You've got a 5-year average to determine what that baseline is. And what they did for starters was give you the average between the Texas A&M cost of production and the ERS cost of production, and arrived at $14.50, 185% of that. So that's where we start with just rice as an example. So price loss coverage is an option, probably a better option for Mid-South because we're heavily irrigated here. But you still have the option to opt into crop insurance if that works for you. That's your choice. Now, if you opt into PLC, then you're in for 5 years. You're in for the life of the farm bill. You can't change. You do have the flexibility of determining what acres you might want in. So if you're considerably heavier in corn versus rice, you might say, I want this corn acres to go into crop insurance if that's what you want to do. You don't have to. But I want to keep my rice in the PLC. Gives you some flexibility. So I think that's going to be good and it'll work. You know, these programs, the resources are thin, as you know. We're in a budget crunch in Washington, no secret there. So these programs are not designed to be a profit center, but more of a stopgap measure to make sure that you've got some recourse to be in business next year in a scenario like, you know, last year, for example, with flooding. The planting windows were closed for a lot of people, didn't get an opportunity to replant. You may have lost a heck of a lot of crop to flooding, didn't have the opportunity to replant. Any number of scenarios that could come up. We want to make sure that you get the opportunity to stay in business. May not make a big profit this year. Hopefully it'll be around next year, and these programs are geared toward that. The other thing I think is interesting to note, we had a bipartisan vote on this House version, 35 to 11. Now there's 46 members on this committee, and only 11 no votes on the bill. That's remarkable in today's political climate. And there were some cuts made to the nutrition title. Now, we may have some debate about whether those cuts were enough, and we did have the debate. Some people wanted to cut more. But what we did was cut $16.5 billion out of the nutrition title over a 10-year period. That sounds like a big number, and it is a big number. And I think we need to start recognizing and respecting the fact that these are big numbers we deal with, and when we start talking about trillions, those are numbers that we can't even begin to comprehend, and yet we're talking about $1.5 trillion deficit for the 4th consecutive year. So it's easy to look at a $16.5 billion cut spread out over 10 years and think, well, that's pretty small. But it's monumental in terms of advancing the discussion to recognize that we do have to start taking cuts out of programs that we might not like to or that might not be popular, but are necessary. And just to put it in perspective, the 247% increase in 10 years in food stamp benefits. 247% increase in 10 years. Now, we're having this farm bill debate and we're looking at a 38% cut to the commodity title, roughly. I think it's reasonable to think that other programs, like nutrition, can also bear some cuts in this environment. Now, the initial budget reconciliation came up with about $31.5 billion. That's only 4%. The House Farm Bill pared that back to $16.5 billion, which equates to roughly 2% cut over a 10-year period. Again, we're going to have some debate on whether we think that's enough. Do we need to cut more? Maybe we do. We'll get to that point. But it's entirely reasonable and entirely responsible to take the approach we did with respect to the nutrition title, because most of those cuts were found by closing loopholes that have been exploited by states. These are state-administered programs of federal dollars. Now, to Arkansas's credit, they do a good job at administering these federal programs. So we don't have the exploitation of loopholes that you might see in the urban centers. It's very, very common. And as an example, one of the things that we did was close the loophole that allowed for eligibility simply by receiving a nominal payment from the LIHEAP program. If you don't know what that is, that's a low-income home energy assistance program. You can get as little as a $5 check from LIHEAP and automatically certify you as eligible to receive food stamp benefits. This is the kind of stuff we got to stop at the federal level. We can't have that kind of exploitation. We have precious few resources. And if we're going to help people and we're going to do the most good, they have to go where they're designed to go, and not to folks that would just like to take advantage of programs. And so that's the approach that we took, and in doing that, we're able to find considerable opportunities to ferret out fraud, waste, and abuse and close loopholes and keep people from exploiting the system. We've got a long way to go, but this is a good starting point. And when I talk to farmers around the district, we talk about this move to a free market. And I'm going to tell you, farmers will tell me, they might not tell me in a big group, but they'll tell me privately, and we get back up to the corner of the room there, and they might say these things. We just need to have a free market, and I get that. We need to move to a free market approach, but we have to first deliver a free market. We're not there. This bill gives us a bridge to that free market. There are a lot of things that stand in the way of you functioning in the context of a free market. Trade agreements for one, EPA regulations for another, and regulations, for example, under Dodd-Frank, where you want to employ those free market tools that are available to you, but you're afraid to because you don't know how you're going to be treated under the Dodd-Frank rules with respect to your status as either a bona fide hedger, end user, whatever the rules may dictate, and they're not fully implemented, and we don't know how you're going to be treated as an ag producer, as an end user of those hedging instruments. Those hedging instruments can be instrumental in helping you cash flow, but if you're scared to use them, they don't do you any good. And most people are right now because they don't know how they're going to be treated, how much it's going to cost, what the repercussions might be under these new rules. And so all of that does come under the Ag Committee. We've had the CFTC chairman in there numerous times and questioned him, Chairman Gensler, and I think he's slow walking a lot of rule implementation. There is a lot of concern about, from my perspective, about how ag and energy end users are going to be treated, and those are our two key constituents for us here in the 1st District of Arkansas. So that's what we're dealing with on the Ag Committee. We did pass what I think was a stellar farm bill under these conditions, and we passed it on a bipartisan vote. We sent it to the floor, sent it to leadership for a request to go to the floor, and leadership on both sides is saying, no, we don't want this. One side says we're cutting too much out of nutrition. The other side says we're not cutting enough. I think personally we found the sweet spot in this environment that allows us to advance a farm bill that helps you, that helps bridge that gap to the free market. And then we need to get busy working on these trade agreements and tearing down the trade barriers that are affecting your market access. And of course I mentioned the EPA. I don't think you can mention them enough. The heavy boot of regulation that's always on your throat that impedes your progress and your ability to cash flow and grow jobs. So that's the approach I think we need to take. Here's where we stand with the Farm Bill as of today. We left there requesting, I signed a bipartisan letter, I think it was near 100 members, requesting that leadership consider the Farm Bill on the floor. We left there knowing that we're going back home. 2/3 of the country is in drought condition, probably like we've not seen since 1956. And I hope that those conditions will change their minds. For those members that were against a farm bill, that they go home and they hear from growers in their region, and they start to recognize the fact that we need a farm bill and we need it now. Clock's ticking. Barring that, we have a procedural maneuver that we can use. It's called a discharge petition. I've already signed the discharge petition. And that would basically bypass leadership and force the bill to the floor. So if cooler heads don't prevail, and I'm hopeful that they will, but if they don't, we do have a provision that we can utilize that will hopefully bring this farm bill to the floor. And I would rather it not come to that, but if it does, I'm on board with it because I'm committed to getting a farm bill on the floor as soon as we can. So that's where we're at with the Farm Bill in Washington right now. It's a good bill. It's not perfect. It doesn't address every issue. The issues that it does address you may not be crazy about, but on balance, this is a good approach. And it's considerably better than the Senate version. And honestly, I think going to conference and reconciling the two bills is largely a formality. I think we've really agreed in principle on most of these issues. A few things that we do still have to work on, but I think we can conference it quickly and meet a deadline, and I'm optimistic. I'm always going to be optimistic. Glass is half full, and we're going to keep working hard and hopefully deliver a farm bill for you. With that, happy to answer any questions you might have. This is a good crowd. This is a good crowd. Sir?
When is the deadline? What happens if you don't meet it?
Well, September 30th is the deadline for the current law to expire. A couple of things to consider. Number one, if we pass that deadline, the nutrition title continues unchecked. The provisions in the 08 Farm Bill will discontinue. Now there's some kind of, I think, a little bit of, I don't want to call it an urban myth or whatever, but, and Chris in the back can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I think there's a lot of misconception about the fact that we would go back to the 1949 law, 47 law rather. That's not going to happen. I don't think that can happen. But we do know that the portion of the current law that is not touched is the nutrition title. So there would certainly be some discontinuation from a funding standpoint, and we'd have some uncertainty about going into next year, but I don't think that there should be this undue concern about reverting back to the 1947 law, although in some camps they might like that. Adjusted for inflation, heck, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. There's just some talk about it, but I don't think that's realistically one of the things that you'll see happen. So there's a possibility they could extend the current law to keep that from happening. Now, that sounds good short term, but what I'm afraid of is long term, what we do is mess up our baseline, kick this into the next Congress. We're going to see some pretty dynamic changes in this next Congress. And I don't think you would like the way the Farm Bill would look. I think we're better off to move this Farm Bill that we have now, rather than do an extension, potentially mess up the baseline, and then have a lot more austere approach next time around. So I'm supporting this version and that approach. Anybody else? Sir?
Your procedure that you were talking about, bypassing leadership, if it comes to that, do you think there's enough votes there to do that?
I am confident that we have 218 votes to get a Farm Bill out of the House. What the problem is that really no side wants to take blame or credit. And as I said, we've got leadership on both sides that have issues with the Farm Bill. One doesn't cut enough, one cuts too much. But there's no doubt in my mind that we have 218 votes. And I think we can do it. Nothing else? Claude, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
I'm sure that we'll be having him back again. I like what I see. Let's put it that way. A couple of things I wanted to do. I wanted to recognize and thank Judge Keesler, Lee County Judge. Keesler here. Thank you so much. Patrick Allen Service. I want to thank them for coming.